Perhaps no negotiations has drawn more attention than the state's recent CCPOA or prison guard contract. That contract has drawn criticism from the nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office for falling well short of the savings levels Governor Brown had projected, and for including provisions like lifting of the vacation cap and allowing fitness incentive pay. Now, proponents say this is a very tough job, it's a dangerous job, and they deserve all the pay and benefits that they get. Critics note that Ron Yank, the prison guard's attorney for 25 years, was the governor's chief negotiator on this contract, and allege that the contract is simply a political payback because the CCPOA spent millions of dollars to help elect Governor Brown. So, Steve, is this a corruption of the political and collective bargaining process, as some would allege?
Well, I think you mentioned the governor's negotiator was stolen from the prison guards union. To me, that was a brilliant play. You basically took the quarterback from the other team and put him on your side. And so he knew everything, what their bottom line was. And so I thought that was brilliant. The savings are going to be millions of dollars. And that's the bottom line there. And that's something we really, at the end of the day, need to look at. They took a major hit under the Schwarzenegger administration. They were subject to the same cut in pay and furloughs, but they didn't get that time off because they were prison guards and had to be there. So that was the big difference.
Well, one of the things that's been discussed is this 19 weeks of accrued time off. Because can you explain that from the, I guess, the prison guard's perspective? When people see that 19 weeks of accrued time off, that's a lot of time.
Right. The difficult part of that, because as you mentioned in your opening, this is a tremendously difficult job. This is not a job you and I probably would ever want to do. But the vacation pay was there because there's thousands of vacant positions in the prisons right now. And because of that, they weren't allowed to take a lot of their time. It was the managerial decision to make them not take their time. So from the prison guards' perspective, they'd love to have the time off and not be able to accrue it, but they were never able to do that. So that's why it's sort of mounted up.
Well, you know, you do have 120,000 people applying for 900 prison guard positions. That seems to suggest that maybe the state's paying too much for that position.
Well, I think you had that same ratio when McDonald's had their day. I think that's a sign of the times more than anything else. I also think that you have to look and see at the quality of these applicants. Most of these people couldn't qualify as a mall security guard, nevertheless a prison officer. And so if we want to keep the quality of employees we have in those jobs, and we're competing with those jobs with every police department at the local level, we're competing with the CHP for those jobs. That's why they're getting paid those kind of benefits, because it is a tough beat. And you know, fortunately in California, we haven't had an Attica or big prison breaks, and we have very minimal release. And I think it's because of the quality of the people we have there. And the more you don't pay people adequately, the more you have turnover, and we haven't had that in our prisons.
Well, let's focus our attention a little bit on the local scene. Costa Mesa recently voted to lay off nearly half of its municipal workers and contract with outside providers for city services. Do you think this is the start of a trend?
No, I don't think it's a trend. I think that a lot of cities, and I'm more specifically familiar with counties, but a lot of cities contract for services. In Los Angeles County, I think we have 88 cities, and the majority of them contract to Los Angeles County for services. Many counties contract with their local cities for police services, for fire services, other type of public safety services. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a trend. I think it's more of a reaction again to the political realities and the financial realities that we face today.
You're seeing a lot, but you are seeing some jurisdictions. I know Fresno, for example, has been having this ongoing dispute about whether the garbage services should be privatized. Is that something you're seeing around the state?
Sure. I think that it's incumbent upon our elected officials to look at how they provide the services, and it's incumbent upon our unions to also be competitive. You know, as Steve was talking about the prison guards, I mean, you have 1,200 or 120,000 applicants. Are they qualified? And again, getting back to our cities and counties and contractor for services, you have to look at who's the best to provide that service, who's the most qualified to provide that service.
Okay, well, let me kind of talk about public sector negotiations for a second. Often it becomes an exercise in politics. Do you think it's appropriate to use political pressure to secure better wages and benefits for public sector workers?
Oh, I think so. I mean, that's the democracy we live under, and we see pressure from the other side too. Taxpayers associations are very strong in many communities, such as Costa Mesa. They elected a council that decided to crack down on labor unions. So I think it's perfectly adequate and responsible for labor unions to also get in that fight.
Okay. Well, Paul, what about opening the bargaining process? Some people have talked about opening the bargaining process to the sunshine. So letting them, I guess sit on a stage and negotiate while the public watches. What do you think of that proposal?
I think that meaningful negotiations depend upon discussions at the bargaining table being in private. The law currently provides for public access and public information on what's happening at the bargaining table, not being involved in the bargaining itself, but if the Board of Supervisors is going to vote, for instance, on a contract, that contract is public. There are announcements made after closed sessions on negotiations and bargaining. So I don't think that it would be constructive to have the public's participating or observing the negotiation process itself.
There could be a lot of posturing going on with the negotiators if they're negotiating in
That's
the
all you're
public.
going to encourage is posturing. You're not going to encourage meaningful discussions, which is what really need to happen during those negotiations.
We'll want to thank both of you for being with us. When we come back, we'll talk about the public support for public employees and their unions. This is the Maddy Report.